Hi, I'm Scott Ware, and this is the interview show on Xpnsion Network. I'm the publisher of Radiance magazine, which can be found at radiancemm.com. And today I have the great pleasure of interviewing a couple of authors, Alan David Reed and Tahnee Woolf. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Scott. We're happy to be here with you.
Yeah, it's so lovely to be on your show. Thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely. And so just to tell everybody what's coming up, you've developed a program that tells a lot about a person. I know I took the quiz. We're going to talk a little bit about the results of my quiz and also how this helps us navigate these very interesting times, since now we're passing through the age of Aquarius or into it. And actually also a little bit maybe about your history, because you started out as a couple, consciously uncoupled, and are still working together, because it appears that this was partly the reason why you were brought together and how you navigated that using your own technology. Can we call it that?
Well, we like to call it a map of consciousness. What we were really investigating when we came together was understanding people, human dynamics, the world. There were so many questions of why things were the way they were, and nothing really was landing the answer for me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on a lifelong journey of understanding the mysteries and sciences. I've studied very deeply pretty much everything. And what we really came to see here was that there was an understanding around consciousness and life that really was coming from an anthropomorphic or an egocentric perspective in psychology and sciences. And I've been working a lot with scientists at the very cutting edges of quantum physics and really looking at this idea of non-locality and non-local consciousness. And when I really got present to that idea with the mysteries that we're teaching, the idea that consciousness, this entire universe is consciousness, and we're just part of it. And this is, seen with subatomic particles talking to each other at distances simultaneously with no space and time. Everything is connected in this universe, all the galaxies, all the stars, all the subatomic particles, everything's connected. And so when you have that context, what we're putting together is a map of our relationship to that consciousness, whether we're really completely in alignment with it, or we're separated from it and we're seeing the world as being distinct and separated from ourselves, basically. And so this map is really an understanding of what we're seeing, the lenses we're looking through, the colored glasses we're seeing through, because they're really parallel universes that are formed as a result of this.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Tahnee.
I was going to say, essentially what we've really done is mapped an individual's evolutionary spiritual journey, but also the collectives of humanity's evolutionary spiritual journey. So as a person or as a culture grows and awakens and has experiences which cause their consciousness to expand and their sense of connection to their infinite self to come more into focus, and a lot of the fear and the victim mentality and the scarcity consciousness and the separation consciousness falls away, someone can actually shift from one terrain into the next. And when they do, they'll be like, whoa, I don't want to do the same job anymore. I'm no longer resonating with the same people. My family doesn't seem to get me anymore. And people have this common experience of suddenly feeling like they don't fit their life anymore. And it's often because they've had a shift in their terrain of consciousness. But as a culture, we're so busy focusing on the more anthropomorphic stuff, like our personality types and our attachment styles and our childhood wounding and all the kind of more surface stuff, which is important to understand, very important to understand. But there's also other stuff operating deeper, which is where someone's at in their spiritual journey, where someone's at in their relationship to their own infinite self. And that's going to completely, dramatically change how they respond to situations when they're triggered, how they see themselves fitting into the collective, into the society, the kind of role they're here to play, the gifts they're here to give the world, and the challenges they're facing and the lessons they're learning at that point in their journey. So it's a really important thing to understand.
I know, Alan, and I appreciate that. When you started talking, Alan, I was thinking, wow, I'm having a hard time keeping up with some of this. And then you mentioned some things that I could get into more, but I was glad that there was so much of that kind of dense, physics and everything involved that you brought to this, because basically this quiz, you take the quiz and it's a very fun, friendly quiz, sometimes a little, tricky in the sense of the two questions they're asking you sound very much alike. Which are you more like? But I'm glad to know all of that is behind, all of what you bring to it is behind this, because when I took it, it seemed like, a lot of people have taken the Myers-Briggs test. that particular personality test. And this reminded me of an elevated Myers-Briggs test, like a spiritual version. Is that correct?
Well, I'll answer this one because I'm really interested in personality types. Like I'm always figuring out everyone's Myers-Briggs and their Enneagram and their human design and their star signs and everything. And that's really helpful stuff to know, because often we have clashes between people based on, you know, more introverted or extroverted or more abstract thinker or a sensory person, all that kind of Myers-Briggs stuff. But actually, this is a very different thing we're measuring. This is more similar to measuring someone's age. So someone might be an ENTJ in the Myers-Briggs and a 3 Enneagram and a Scorpio, and they're 12 years old, and they're an ENTJ and a Scorpio and a 3 Enneagram, and they're 24 years old, but they're still the same personality type, the same body type, the same coloring, the same introverted, extroverted, but they're at a different point in their journey. So really what we're mapping is where someone's at in their spiritual evolution, in their sense of their own connection to the infinite self. And they'll take their personality type with them, but they will embody it differently. So a person at this terrain will embody their ENTJ personality type very differently than a person at this terrain, because they're at a different point in their journey. They're coming from maybe a more love-based or a more fear-based place. So we can talk a little bit about what the differences are in the terrains, but it is actually quite a different thing than personality type.
Yeah, they're really the fundamental operating system underneath which we perceive life, and our values and beliefs and everything are built on top of this. And you can think of like the land has different terrains, and on the different terrains, different kinds of plants and trees grow. And this is a condition that these, you know, the terrain is the condition upon which these plants grow. Well, in the same sense, we're a fractal universe here. So in our psyche, you know, the terrain of consciousness that we're inhabiting is going to determine how we see the world, how we're perceiving it, how we're valuing it, our beliefs around it. If we're seeing things as separate from ourselves, our values our safety needs are going to come from protecting ourselves from potential threats outside of ourselves. If we come to an expanded understanding that there is no outside of ourselves, there is no separation from ourselves, and this is all me, and this is all just my creation, then you have a very different relationship. You have a relationship that starts to take responsibility for everything that you're thinking and doing, because you realize that there is no separation and you're it. And so there's nowhere to run in that moment. So you really have to get very, you know, responsible and present to who you are.
Okay. As far as when people have taken this test and they've moved through your program, what are the results? What do people find when they go through this mapping?
Well, usually often people come to it for 3 different reasons. They either come because they want to understand themselves better. So they'll start with our quiz, which you can do at 10terrains.com. It takes about 10 minutes. It's a really fun little self-analysis quiz. We put years into it though, because it's actually not an easy thing to figure out someone's relationship to reality. And you have to get underneath the books they've read and the meditation retreats they've done and the ayahuasca journeys they've done, and really get to where they're at in their journey in an embodied place. So it took us many years to develop that and refine it. And it's now very accurate. So a lot of people do the quiz to really understand themselves. Like, why am I having the experiences I'm having right now at this moment in my life? You know, what are the lessons I'm here to learn? What are the things I'm here to give right now? And to have an understanding of why their life is so different from maybe 10 years ago when they were at a different terrain. Or sometimes people come to us when they're in the middle of a terrain shift and they don't know what's going on. They think everything's weird, and they get their result and they go, oh, that explains so much. I feel so much better now. Right. And then the second reason people come to it is because they're not getting along with someone in their life. Like their parents are at a different terrain to them, and maybe someone in the family is ill and the parents want them to do chemotherapy, and the other person in the family wants them to do some sort of emotional clearing work or energetic work. And the parents are really terrified by that because they're at a very different terrain of consciousness, and they have a much greater need for the status quo and consensus reality and authority figures to be backing things up so that they can feel safe, because they're at a different terrain. And so often people show up at our work because they're having a clash with someone, with their partner or with their colleague or their family. And so they want to understand their own terrain and then read our book or get their friend to do the quiz or their parents to do the quiz so they can see where the other person's at, and then start to be able to communicate with that person in a way that really can be heard, that lands with the other person. Because once you understand another person's terrain, especially if it's a terrain you've already been at some point in your own life, it's easier to relate to that person, to have compassion for where they're at. But even if it's a terrain you haven't been at yourself, still having an understanding of it can make it so much easier to communicate with the person, to let them be where they're at and have their own experience without trying to force them to shift and grow at your own agenda, and to allow someone to be where they're at. And then the third reason that people tend to come to our work is if they're more like Alan, who's more of a macro thinker, I'm more of an interpersonal person. If they're more of a macro thinker and they're wanting to understand like the playing out of economics and political systems and what's happening on the planet politically and over history, the patterns that have played out, because as we explained before, it's not just individuals that go through this journey, it's also a collective, a civilization, a city, a nation can go through these shifts in terrain, and the culture emerges, and the political systems and the art, everything emerges out of the terrain that a culture's at. So people who are interested in that kind of stuff, not so much in the personal spiritual growth work or the interpersonal relationship stuff, are also drawn to this. So there's really 3 different kinds of groups that come to this, and they all get really different kinds of results depending on what they're needing help with to understand themselves, to understand other people, or to understand the world.
What are some sample testimonials? Are people feeling more free or liberated in their lives?
Well, what we're seeing in that sense is that many of the more expanded people that are taking our quiz are quite relieved and heartened to see that they're being gotten for the first time, because in our culture, you've got sort of the mainstream consensus reality, and anybody that doesn't fit into that box feels they're a bit of an odd person out. And so when you get the understanding of where you're sitting along this continuum of terrains, and if you go to 10terrains.com, I can spell that TENTERRAINS.com, there's a series of icons, and we've got them here above us, that you can start to study. And this is really looking at how each of these people are seeing the world. And when somebody's more expanded, they really are able to see the world from the perspective of those at the mainstream, but they have a different relationship. And when they finally feel heard and gotten for the first time, it's a huge relief. They actually come back to us oftentimes in tears that they're being seen for the first time, and they're not crazy. And the thing is that there's many of us out there, but we just don't know each other. And so what the 10 Terrains is helping to do is bridge and build a connection, a field to many others around us that are potentially neighbors, but we don't even know them yet.
And one of the things we're hoping will come out of this work spreading around the world, which is already starting to happen, is what we're in the process of building some online courses, which will enable us to have an online community where people can come in, and after they've done their quiz, let's say they come out at Spiral or a Toroid, one of the terrains that's less people at that terrain, they're quite expanded terrains, and then they can connect with other people somewhere else in the world, maybe not in their local community, but they can meet other people of kindred spirits who really are at the same point in their spiritual journey. And so many people are craving that, especially if they're living in big cities and don't have people like that around them. So that's one of the benefits. And then the other benefits are, obviously, as people improve their relationships, they have less conflict, they have more harmony, they get along better, there's much greater peace in their life. And then the people who are more interested in the political stuff, they come to so much peace of mind, because rather than being angry about what's happening in the world, once you actually have a framework for understanding it, you can have compassion for the different players in the world that are at different terrains and they're not coming from where you're coming from, then you can be a lot calmer and come from a place of empowered action, not so much from fear and reaction, which is where people are usually coming from. So just having this information can completely change how you're holding it within yourself.
Okay. All right. I'm curious if this was something you hammered out, or if it was downloaded and it was an easy process. How did you come by this information?
Well, it really was a confluence of both of our journeys when we were initially together asking the same questions, and we were looking at other models out there as well. We were just looking at what information was available, and I have studied many systems. Nothing really was answering the question. The ones that were answering the question a little bit were getting some of the anthropology correct, but they weren't really getting the full picture. And so what really evolved from that conversation was just a stepping back process and looking at, well, what's really going on here? What's not being seen? And what's fascinating in retrospect to look at is that all of the most esoteric religions have been dancing around this conversation for millennia, but it's never really been this concisely landed. And what we're seeing, this is kind of the Occam's razor of consciousness. What we've really seen come through this process is the very essence of what it is to be either at infinity with your infinite self, at one with your infinite self, and connected to everything and realizing there's no separation, or to be at some point apart from that, and how you're having a relationship now with life.
And to answer your question about how did it come through us,
Yeah.
Alan and I have always had this weird thing when we're together, which made it kind of challenging as a romantic couple, but very effortless as a colleague pair, that when we're together, a kind of field opens up between us where a lot of stuff comes down, a lot of stuff comes in. And we both have almost like opposite brains. We're both really good at seeing patterns, but we do it from a totally 180-degree opposite perspective.
Okay.
And so Alan's really good at seeing the macro patterns, and I'm really good at seeing the interpersonal details between people. And he's very sort of deep and profound, and I'm very quick and intuitive. And the combination together, it's like ideas will come through one of us and the other one will interrogate it and sit with it and maybe douse it or feel into it. And then the other one will analyze it, and then we'll argue about it. And then it sort of got refined and refined over our conversations. We never sat down to create this, by the way. We were just trying to understand the world. And we just found that whenever we were hanging out, we were always talking about this, but we were doing our real work, you know. And one day I said to Alan, you know, maybe we should just take a break from our real work and write some of this down, all these interesting things we've been talking about. And as we started to write, it was just like 1,000 pages came out. And it was like, oh my God, okay, I think maybe this is our work. And over time, it just became obvious that what were we doing? We spent all day, every day talking about this. Maybe this is what we're supposed to be doing. And it just became clearer and clearer and simpler and simpler. And the model actually showed itself very simply in the beginning as these 10. But over time, we filled out the details of it and our understanding of it, because it's been teaching us just as much as it's teaching everyone else in the world. Our understanding of it deepened over the years to the point where we started to see subtle distinctions between each terrain as someone's moving from one to the other, which could take decades sometimes. There's very subtle changes happening, and we're really starting to understand even the depths of those details. But for most people, it's enough just to understand each terrain, which terrain I'm at, which terrain my family members are at, which terrain my city or my country or my culture is at, and are these all different? Because sometimes you can feel very dislocated if you're at a different terrain to the culture, and that can create a lot of grief for people.
And I think it's fascinating that we, you know, have in this evolution really seen empirically the evidence again and again, to the point now for myself, there's no dispute the accuracy of this model. Mathematically, the yin and yang, the symmetries, the polarities, all of this whole model has a certain mathematical elegance and symmetry that really holds together when you step back and look at it. It just reflects the symmetry and the order and the beauty of the universe. And it's because I think we really looked at the idea that consciousness is not coming from our brain, as most current science would have you think, that it's just a result of chemicals, and once we die, that's all gone away. The truth of the matter is we are infinite and immortal beings. This consciousness is forever. So much of what science is seeing about big bangs and all of that just really aren't how things were created. And so everything is really being looked at here from a very different place. It's like putting the sun at the middle of the solar system rather than the earth. You get a completely different result, but the result you get is the simplicity and the elegance, because it all falls into place. And the present understandings in much of science is having like the earth at the middle. It doesn't really fall, you know, together, and it's very complex. Here, this makes things very simple, and you can really start to get who you are. And you want to say something?
I was just gonna, Alan's got this really beautiful demonstration. I was hoping he'd do it, but I'll do it. So really what this model is saying in a nutshell is, if you imagine this point here is our infinite self, all of oneness, everything that we all are interconnected. And this is the degree to which we're separated from that. So if you look at this continuum, someone all the way over here, they're being held over here by a huge amount of resistance, charge, beliefs, programming, lifetimes of trauma, lifetimes of choices that have been made, karma, whatever you want to call it. It's basically the bundle of charge forces keeping them at that point in their spiritual journey. And they may stay there for decades, they may stay there for lifetimes, that's okay. There's no goal, there's no rush, we're infinite. But at some point they might shift in their awareness and they move along this continuum of terrains to a different point. And now they're at a different terrain, they're seeing the world differently, they're much closer to their infinite self. Someone who's all the way over here in their journey is really at one with everything, coming from a state of pure surrender in every moment, connected to the divine. There's no more ego operating. So this map is degrees of separation from the oneness that we already all are, but a lot of us have forgotten. And our behaviors show up very differently at each point along this continuum, because our behaviors necessarily arise out of our terrain. So it might be helpful to talk about 2 or 3 of the terrains so people can get a sense of what we're really talking about and how they really affect us differently.
But I would like to just add to the point that Tahnee's saying there, that what we think we often try to do is make ourselves shift. And as you can see from this rubber band metaphor, the idea is that as you relax or as you heal, you automatically are going to be taken back to yourself, because our body is a self-healing system. The universe, consciousness, is a self-healing system. And as we heal the programming and the conditioning and the trauma that is holding us in charge and separation, we're naturally going to heal back to the unity of ourself. And so we don't have to do anything. The universe is doing all of it. All we have to do is basically heal the separation that we're holding, heal the stories, heal the judgments, forgiveness, ho'oponopono. I mean, there's thousands of practices, all of them valid. Everything is a piece of a puzzle to get you to basically get out of your own way so that you can come back to yourself.
Yep, you're talking to the right audience as far as all that goes. I know that people would be able to latch on easier to the concepts you're talking about and the terrains if you shared. Well, if I could ask the question everyone would want to know, you guys came together as a couple, you parted ways as a couple, but continued to work together as colleagues. How did you use the terrains to help you navigate that terrain?
Well, it's not so much how to use the terrains, because it's not something you use, it's just something you're at. Like, I'm 22 years old, I don't use being 22 years old. It's just that if you're at a certain point in your journey, you're going to deal with something like a breakup very differently. So let's say 2 people are at pyramid, the will-based terrain, and they're coming out of a relationship. Pyramid is a terrain where there's a lot of fear. It's us against them mentality. There's a lot of power dynamics. So it'll be like, who can get the house, and I'm going to have the kids. And there's just going to be no listening to each other, because the terrain that the people are at is very much about who's got the most power, because that's what helps them feel safe. If the 2 people are at infinity, the unity-based terrain, where they're in a place of continual surrender in the moment to their divine self, there won't even be any issues, because it'll just look at each other with so much unconditional love there will be nothing to even discuss. So between those 2 points is everything else in the human experience. So depending on which terrain you're at, you're going to respond so differently. So because
that's why we wanted to specifically talk about you guys.
Yeah. So Alan and I are specifically, at the time we came together, Alan was at toroid, the fractal-based terrain, and I was at spiral, moving to toroid, the fractal-based terrain. We've both shifted since then, because this has been a period of 10 years. But at that time we were. And so even though we were having a lot of personality clashes, because our personality types are really opposite, our brains are opposite, you know, we're not compatible humans in personality, which is why we've been able to create this work, because we're such opposites and our brains are so opposite. But it meant that on a human level, it was challenging to be in relationship with someone who's so different from you. But because we're both at either toroid or moving into toroid, which is a terrain where there's very much a sense of connection to the collective field, the quantum field, bringing the truths through and being in a place of total trust and surrender and knowing that the quantum field has your back, it enables 2 people to acknowledge maybe there's a higher purpose for why we came together, and it's not necessarily the human stuff. And so we were able to both realize that actually there's something else bringing us together. It's spirit has brought us together to do this work. And so our job is to get the human stuff out the way. And so we both did a lot of work to do that, working on clearing ourselves, doing holographic clearing practices, energetic clearing practices, working through our past lives, our childhood traumas, anything that was in the way on a human level so that this work could come through. I suspect if Alan and I had been at circle and spiral at the time, we wouldn't have been able to do that, because we can only come from our own terrain.
Well, in the understanding of the terrains, as you become more expanded, you actually become more selfless, and you start looking at service and giving back, because you realize your relationship to the whole. And it's not just what's in it for me. It's like, how can I be in service? And so when you get to realize that we're here in service, we were really looking at what's going to serve the greater good. And so being able to maintain a relationship and navigate our way through this dissolution of the personal relationship, yet still maintain the love and the connectedness and the collegiateness.
We'll make up a word.
To have that continue and really, basically be putting that above our individual stuff. And that's really the difference. As someone is separated from themselves, they're going to put their stuff above the whole. As someone becomes more integrated with themselves, they're going to put the whole above themselves.
But isn't it true that to get to that point, they did have to put themselves first in order to understand? Because isn't it true that you're here for you, Alan? You're not here for, and when you're doing what you're doing, it's going to have benefits, but isn't it, this is your experience, right? And same with you, Tom.
Yes, it's an interesting point. You actually do, at one end of this journey, when you're really separated, you're giving your power up completely. And so the journey is to kind of start to get your power back and to start to take hold of your life and say, yes, I've got to put me first. If I want to love myself, I can't love someone else if I don't love myself first.
Right.
That's the first part of the journey, is coming to start to love yourself. But then as you expand in that self-love, it kind of goes down the other direction.
Sure.
And what's interesting about these terrains, Alan talked about how there's symmetry in the model, that the terrains actually go from collective focus to individual focus to collective focus to individual focus, from masculine energy to feminine energy. So depending on where someone's at in their journey, their focus is going to be a bit different. So I'll give some very quick examples of that. So if someone's at the order-based, someone's at pyramid, the wheel-based terrain, it's a very individual focused terrain. I'm coming from scarcity consciousness. I believe everyone's out to get to me. I have to, I'm the master of my own destiny. I'm going to amass as much wealth and power as I can to keep myself safe. If we shift to the next individual terrain, which is 2 terrains up, the reflection-based terrain diamond, this is, well, actually, I'll say the one in the middle so it makes sense. So then we go to a collective focus terrain, which is the order-based terrain square, which is where someone says, actually, I get my sense of safety from being part of a smoothly running system with order and rules, and I'm going to give some power up to that system and be an upstanding member of society and believe in the consensus reality, be a cog in the machine, and help the collective to survive and thrive. And so this is a sort of selfless collective place to come from, and it's very much where the mainstream is at. If someone was to shift from square to diamond, the reflection-based terrain diamond, which is where some countries are at the moment, but most people are still at square, diamond is, again, an individual focused terrain. And the shift that happens here is someone goes, well, hang on a sec, I decide who I am. I decide my own identity. I'm a unique expression of the world. I'm going to have my own brand. I'm going to forge my own path. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to innovate. I'm going to decentralize the systems and overthrow the systems and create and innovate and grow and expand. So everyone at diamond is doing that in a different way than the people at pyramid were, having their own individual path. Then we come to circle, which again is a collective focused terrain. And the shift here is from head to heart. And someone at circle is in a very deep space of connectedness to the web of life. So it's not just the society and the laws, it's the whole web of life, all the animals, the ancestors, the future children unborn. That is what someone at circle is deeply, viscerally connected to, not just as an idea. And so people at circle live in a very collaborative way. There's not necessarily a leader that's a visionary like at diamond. We're all working together.
This is good. I like that you're breaking down each one. I'm looking at the symbols behind you. So the next one is the spiral.
It helps to make it a little bit clearer. I mean, there's obviously 10 of them. I'm not going through all 10, but I'm just showing how they go individual, collective.
I like
each one is sort of a next layer up. So then if someone shifts from, and circle really is the journey, diamond to circle is a shift from the head to the heart, from doing to being, from outer focus to inner focus. So someone at circle is coming to a collective place like they were at square, but from a much more inner space now, and a connection to the earth and to nature and to their body wisdom and to life. So then someone shifts from circle to spiral, which is where you came out on your quiz. and you're in the process of this shift. And spiral is again an individual focused terrain. So it's no surprise that you asked this question, because only someone moving into spiral would ask this question. Because at spiral, someone is starting to come back to an individual focus, but this time it's a multi-dimensional sense of self. So at pyramid, it was like, I'm master of my own destiny, I'm going to be in charge of everyone and run everything. At diamond, it's I'm an individual, I've got my own path, I'm in the world, I'm doing my own thing in the outside world, I've got my own brand, you know, I'm innovative. At spiral, it's an inner process of connectedness to the self. So I'm going to come into alignment on all levels of my being, my higher self, my inner knowing, my body, my gut wisdom. People at spiral are always working on staying in alignment, being in resonance, living in the now. All the Eckhart Tolle ideas are all coming from spiral. It's very much about being in full coherence at all levels of your being, taking responsibility for the reality you're creating. It all comes back to the self at spiral. They're always doing shadow work and clearing, inner clearings, you know. And then at toroid, it shifts again to a collective feminine focus, which is receptive to the quantum field and coming from service. A lot of that deep inner journey that happens spiral has been completed, and the person is now coming from a place of service to the collective at that point in their journey. But it's very different to how it showed up at circle, which was a deep connection to the web of life, because now it's to the multiverses and the collective field and the playing out of the tapestry of consciousness. So they're all the same, but they're just each at a different echelon of the spiral. Think of it as something that's getting more expanded, coming back to the same spot, but from a higher place or a more expanded place.
Can you keep going? So what's the infinity one, that second to last one?
Do you want to do infinity?
Well, infinity, basically, it's individual if we take the model back from collective to individual. And it's the idea that now you have no separation within yourself. You are basically in unity with the infinite self you are. And in that place, you are at your I am power center, if you will. You're in your infinite power. And really, to step back to the question you're asking, when you really are coming through these terrains and becoming very expanded, what you're doing with yourself is congruent with who you are. So you basically are, there is no job. It's who you are. You're expressing who you are. It's like I don't go off and be a job or do something separate. It's just you are what you are, and you give that to the world. So you really find that you don't get tired. You're very impassioned because you're really in alignment. So as you come to the unity-based terrain infinity, you're really being you, and you're expressing you, and you can't go wrong when you're doing that.
But it's you in the capital Y. It's you in that your ego's out of the way. By time someone's at infinity, when they're showing up in the world, they're not trying to be a guru or a leader or try and get their brand out there. They're so in the moment, in service to the divine will. There is no ego running that bus anymore. They're purely an expression of the divine. In every moment the divine says, step in front of that bullet, they will. Like it's complete egoless state. So it's just very, very small numbers of people in the world at that terrain. They're not the big teachers out there, but if you meet someone at infinity, you will feel it in your being, because they have a huge presence and they're very humble, and you just feel calm around them. There's no agenda. They're not trying to make anyone change. All of that starts to drop away at spiral. So the first 6 terrains tend to be focused on my terrain is the only way to be, and so there can be a lot of clashes between terrains. Once someone shifts into spiral, it's what we call a multi-focus, multi-dimensional terrain, where someone is able to hold the fact that everybody's different very easily and have no judgment about where anyone's at, and no longer need to change other people or change the world. And so from spiral onwards, there's no more any need to fight reality. So those last 3 terrains in some ways are an easier journey, but in other ways they're a more difficult journey, because you have to be self-responsible in every moment. So people always think, oh, I just want to be at infinity, life would be so good. No, actually, at that terrain, they've got to do a lot of work in every moment to come back to love, There's no more excuses.
And I knew when I was doing the test, I saw some of the questions. I'm like, oh, I know this is the better answer, but I got to be honest. And so I'm glad I did that, of course, because I want to see where I accurately am. And then the final one, what's that all about? The void.
Well, the void-based terrain, no thing. They're like bookends. It really is the place from which consciousness even springs forth. There is no thing there. The whole infinity, the whole infinite, all of the infinite multiverses are all inside of this void. And in this void, there is no thing. But yet we have to have this for context, and if you look at the Kabbalistic lore and others, very deep esoteric lore, they do look at this Ein Sof Or concept of things coming from no thing. So the void basically is a terrain of, I would say, the extreme ascended masters and those that have managed to come from a place of such selflessness that they have transmuted matter to the point of not even needing to be corporeal. They can be in and out of body. They can be timeless and ageless, because you're fully beyond space and time. Even at infinity, you're kind of outside of space and time, but here you're even further beyond that. So not too many people on the planet, but they're around.
And we should say that, like, the first terrain, we didn't talk about the first two because I started at pyramid, but I can tell you in one sentence, the first terrain, the matter-based terrain, is void and matter. They're there in the model just for context. You're not going to meet people at these two terrains. You're just not, because they're so rare. But you are going to meet people from radial to infinity. But the matter-based terrain particle, think of caveman, in such a state of fear 24/7 in reaction to the environment. There's a wolf coming, I better run. There's a tiger coming, I better run. There's not even any thought or story. It's just a gut response. There's very few people in the world at that terrain. But the terrain after that, which is the one before pyramid, which I left out, there are some people at this terrain. It's the terrain of fundamentalism. We've given it the symbol of radial. We call it the faith-based terrain, but it's really the fundamentalist terrain. It's where someone is giving their power so completely to a concept outside themselves, like a deity or a god, that they will do anything. Like, they will do suicide bombing if they're told to, because they've just given up all sense of self. And so pyramid, which can seem like the terrain of evil doing and world conquest and domination, when you look at it, that it's actually an expansion on radial, where someone goes, actually, I'm master of my own destiny. Thank you very much. I'll make my own choices. I'm going to get in control of this situation. It's actually a shift in expansion from radial.
It sounds like it's like someone going from a cult to starting their own cult.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
Yes.
Because every terrain really is reacting and expanding to the one before it, and that's sort of this leapfrogging that happens. So when we look at the history of our planet, we can see the ones previous to square very clearly. It's what happens after that that's been a bit murky in people's understanding. But when you come from this understanding that everything is emerging from this void into this infinite consciousness, then it just steps down, and literally I can step down the physics of it and the energetics of it. It all just falls very neatly into place.
And so someone like you who's sort of circle moving into spiral, because that's why you came out on the quiz, you're at a very different place to our culture. I mean, most countries or cities are either going to be at square, at diamond, or at diamond. The Western world as a whole at the moment has been at diamond since about the 1960s. So it's very much about innovation, individual path, create our own identity. What's my gender fluidity? What's my brand? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? But it's all in an outer sense. Like, I'm going to have an identity that the world is going to reflect back to me through what I wear, or my clothes, or my subculture, or my work in the world is going to confirm my sense of identity. So that's a very different place than someone who's that circle moving to spiral is coming from. It's just a radically different place in the journey. So someone's circle moving to spiral, they're very deeply connected to their heart, to the web of life, to other people, to their own body wisdom. And they're in a very deeply inner path, and it's becoming more inner and more inner. And diamond is so outer focused on doing and achieving, and spiral is so inner focused on being. And I don't need to do anything. I just need to be my own energetic frequency, and that's enough. And out of that, the doing will come. So you see how someone who's at spiral or moving into spiral, living in a diamond world, can feel really like, oh, I'm out of sync with the culture. This is challenging. I need to find other people like me. Is any of this resonating with your experience?
It is, and the fact that I found one person in particular who's my life partner makes it very helpful.
Beautiful.
But yeah, no, I'm used to that. Used to being and okay with that. Yeah, because it is my journey. So
exactly.
Yeah, and there's a contrast between spiral and diamond, that it's spiral, you're really asking what's my truth in the moment, rather than, well, find a need and fill it. Or at diamond, you're really kind of like, well, if enough people think this is popular, then I'm going to get on that bandwagon. At Spiral, you're like, well, I don't care if there's a bandwagon or not. This isn't ringing true for me. This isn't, this doesn't hold for me. So you're really, it's a know thyself terrain. It's about an inner truth that you come to, and you're really doing a lot of inner distillation, inner reflection, and coming to know who you are very deeply.
But I just want to say one thing, because I really don't want to give the wrong impression here. Diamond is an amazing terrain, and so many of the great things about our world are as a result of Diamond. We wouldn't be doing this interview. There wouldn't be the internet if there hadn't been generations of people at Diamond. And so many of the leading edge thinkers ever throughout history, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, were at Diamond. And all the shifts and growth in our culture, in our art, in our technology have come from people at this terrain. And it's an amazing terrain where someone's saying, I'm not going to just do what the system tells me, I'm going to forge my own path. And they are the terrain of people that change the world. Their job in the collective tapestry, the job of someone at Diamond, really the deep inner spiritual job that they're here to do on the planet at that point in their journey, is to change the world. That's not the job of someone at Spiral. Their job is to be, and to be in their energetic frequency, and to be in alignment, and to be a kind of antenna and a rod of resonance that other people will tune to. But it's a totally different role in the collective.
Which still has a lot of value for the collective. It's just not as overtly visible.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Is one of the gurus of, I think it was, I can't think, Siddhartha, I can't remember the name, but he started out in young life doing political activism and really being on the streets and being active as you would think to try and change things. But as he became more enlightened, he retreated to a cave because he knew that as he went into himself and he could hold himself in a state of love, just he alone holding the field was actually transmuting the entire civilization. So one thing we see with these terrains is that there's a inherent power when we come back into ourselves that is greater than the sum of the parts, so to speak. So you can have one person who is really holding pure love within themselves and really holding the highest good for the field, can actually transmute many others around them that are holding fear and are very separated and really aren't in a lot of power because of it. It's kind of like sunlight to moonlight.
Power versus force.
It's like power versus force. So there's a lot of beauty in coming home to yourself.
And if you think of the bookends of this map, again, like it's very symmetrical. You've got pyramid, which is the third one from that end, and toroid, which is the third one from this end. Pyramid is a terrain of force. I don't know if I've got my hands in the right order because it's hard to tell with the Zoom. But pyramid is the terrain of force. It's might and power. It's empire. It's armies. It's war. It's gangs. It's mafia. It's just it's will. That's why we call it the will-based terrain. And toroid, the fractal-based terrain, it's the power of the collective field. It's the power of being in service. It's a power of being receptive to the divine. And so it's power, but it's a totally different kind of power. And so this is why this model is quite symmetrical. And there's things like that the whole way through it, where it's just a different version of that. It's like an expanded version. But I just want to say again, there is no terrain better than any other. It's not better to be at 13 than at 14. It's not better to be at spiral or at toroid. They're just different, and they have different roles to play in the collective. We need people at every terrain for this to be the school that it is. Everybody's purpose is just as important, and there's no need to shift. Some people are here to spend their whole life at one terrain. You know, we often use the example of someone like Abraham Lincoln at Square. If someone is going to overthrow slavery, they need to spend decades at Square, because that is the terrain, the order-based terrain, where someone will go, hang on, I don't like this system of tyranny that's coming from will and power over other people. I believe in freedom. I believe in everybody being exposed to the same laws and the same system. And that can only happen as someone who's deeply in that terrain. You know, Martin Luther King can only happen at Diamond. I mean, there's some people that have to be at that terrain. So, you know, it's not like you must expand. That's just because our culture's at Diamond at the moment. There's an obsession with growth, but actually there's reasons that are bigger for why someone might need to stay at the same place and go very deeply into the learnings of that terrain. And someone else's life purpose might require them to shift between 2 or 3 or even 4 terrains in their lifetime. And it doesn't really matter because it doesn't really matter, because over the next 10, 20 lifetimes, you'll do it all anyway.
Well, exactly. And you mentioned that, yeah, everyone, it's okay. Everyone's doing their own thing, and there's no right or wrong. There's no better than. I imagine for people who are transitioning, like you saw in my testing, I'm transitioning from a circle to a spiral. You have supportive, I don't know, teachings or classes or whatnot to help people do that. Do you support that?
Well, we have a report that you get with, at the end of your quiz, you can get an additional report that's 30 to 40 pages that gives a very concise understanding of where you're sitting on this continuum and how the world looks from that vantage point. And so each of these reports speaks to that position you're coming out at. And from that vantage point, you can look to the other terrains and you'll have a relationship to them that's different.
And what we're currently in the process of building, because people ask us for this question, and Alan and I are 24/7 teaching the concepts of the 10 terrains, we are in the process of setting up some courses to train other people whose specialty is, for example, healing for people at spiral or healing for people at circle. You know, so we're having coaches, counselors, healers come to us to do training so they can take this 10 terrains content and go, okay, my modality is really relevant to people at circle. I'm going to aim at those people now. Or I'm going to have 2 people come to me for counseling. One's at square, one's at diamond. I'm going to understand that. But we can't go out there and offer all the energy courses and the this and that because there's only 2 of us. So our job is to really teach the pure 10 terrains model to as many people as are interested. So if anyone's listening and would love to learn that, like how can I use this in my work as a healer or my work as a coach or my work as a therapist, just do our quiz because that's the way to get into the mailing list. And it's only like $5. And once you've done that, you know your terrain, but then you're in our mailing list. And as we start to create these courses in 2021, which is the coming year, we're going to be offering those courses. Finally, people have been asking us for years and people will be able to do them. So you'll be on our mailing list and we'll let you know. It's really exciting for us because we would love to be able to go into each area and teach, but there's just only 2 of us. We just can't.
You mentioned earlier that things like even countries have a designation, have a terrain. If countries have terrains, does that mean it would be, you could potentially put forth a peace plan in your language, in the language of terrain? So here's where this country is, here's where this country is, here's how we can all come together. Does that exist?
If a mediator was trained in this model, it would change the world.
Yeah, there's you know, you've touched on something important here.
Yes.
Each of these terrains, they are their own universe, and in that universe, they have their own language, their own memetics, their own keywords. And so by knowing the keywords of that terrain, you can really put someone at ease. If you're having a conversation, you're trying to resolve a conflict with someone or just even get along and communicate. If you know the terrain they're at, you can say things with certain kinds of keywords and memes and understanding and basically speak in a language that they're going to feel relaxed and safe with. And so with nations, the same idea that, but most of the nations tend to be square and diamond. It's an understanding I would probably explain here that, yes, we individually are a bundle of charge and we're sitting along this continuum because of that at some point, and that's our terrain. But if we take a group of people and add them up together, you've got a combination that then creates a prevailing terrain. And a family can have a prevailing terrain, a group of people, a company's product, and the markets that you're working with can have terrains, the nations, the neighborhoods, the communities, everything, every group has its prevailing terrain. So knowing how the energy of the groups that you're working with are falling are incredibly important to be able to map things so that that things are landing the way they're landing. So yes, you could have 2 different nations at 2 different prevailing terrains, and they're going to have a potential clash because they're both sort of fighting for their point of view. The more expanded country should be able to find a way to make it so that the less expanded country would feel safe in that negotiation.
Okay. It's never as simple as that when you come to global affairs, because it's not as simple as one country's at one terrain. There's always power factions and people, lobbyists and people pulling the strings, or a pyramid, the rule-based terrain, who are trying to dominate. And then, there's so many other things playing out. It's not as simple as just a country at a terrain. But if you boil it down to something simpler, like we went to a talk a few years ago here in where we live, which is quite a spiritual kind of community, and it was about fluoridating the water. And it was a debate. was kind of a political debate between, I think, the local two aspects of a local government and an environmental group, I think it was, now that I think about it. And one was at square and one was at circle. There were two terrains apart, and it was just amazing. And I was thinking, my God, if there was a mediator, if the mediator understood this, it would have just changed everything, because they both believed 100% what they were saying. They both cared about the environment. They both cared about the community, but they just had completely different relationships to reality. Their sense of what was going to keep the community safe was completely different.
Well,
and
briefly,
if there'd been a mediator in the room,
if you were the mediator, briefly, what would you?
I would have probably spent some time with each of them before the debate, just really explaining what these different terrains are and where the other group was coming from, and to give them a sense that actually they are trying to achieve the same thing. They're just coming from a totally different place, and that what this group needs to feel safe, like the group at square needs to feel that they're doing something that's part of the consensus reality and that's got authority behind it. And I would explain that to the group at circle so they don't poo-poo everything that group's saying, and actually come to them with some real research behind it and some established people behind what they're saying, so that the people at square could listen to it and feel a bit more relaxed, that this is not just radical stuff they're hearing, that there's actually some authority behind it that would help them relax. And then the people at square to understand the deep connectedness that the people at circle have with the environment and with the children and the animals, and that they could reflect that back to them and reference that. And if they're just taking care of each other's needs a little bit in the debate, then they may not agree, but there's going to be a lot less screaming and yelling, and maybe they can find some sort of compromise. Whereas if they're just
screaming, as far as supplying more studies and all that, some people are, will hold that as suspect as well. But you presented an interesting idea that maybe that's exactly what this world needs, is that mediating influence in the middle, and saying, look, let's say just your local government meeting, the local government's having a meeting, or the board of whatever, and they're saying, and they have issues with people, but to say, by the way, we're now going to introduce this issue, this idea of bringing a mediator in, because, well, sometimes we're really far apart, sometimes we're not too far apart, but why not? Let's just do this. And to be trained in something like this sounds ideal, sounds very productive, to just, because we all know the world has become more factionalized and further apart on a lot of things. To introduce a notion, to say, hey, we're going to bring in mediators, I mean, that just sounds like a really good idea whose time has come.
Well, it's like bringing in translators. When you get, if we were to meet with some envoys from China, we would need somebody to speak English and Chinese in order for us to have a conversation. It's no different here. You're really dealing with people that are fundamentally talking a different language, and you need to be able to translate between them.
And to be really honest, my childhood required this of me. Is probably one of the reasons why I was guided to do this work, or was given that childhood, because my father was at square, my mother was at spiral, and they never understood each other. They also had personality differences, but as a child, I was always trying to mediate between them to understand why can't they hear each other? It was like I just took it on as my job as a child to try and figure that out. And I think it played out in this life work, because now I understand. And when my dad read our book when we first published it, he just like, oh my God, I finally understand your mother.
Oh, wonderful. So well, I'm sure that's, it's hard to generalize all couples, like, or many couples fall in these ways, but what are some general things you would say to couples out there who are, many of whom at any level are always working through something? Well,
often a couple will start out at the same terrain because they meet, they resonate with each other, and then their journeys become different. So someone might shift and expand and shift to the next terrain, and the other one doesn't, and that can cause a lot of conflict often, because like, oh, they don't seem to want to do the same things, they're not wanting to do the same work, they don't click with me as much, they're changing, I'm scared, and that can often happen. And so if someone has, let's say you went to a counselor who was trained in the 10 terrains model, as we said, next year we will be training counselors, they would be able to identify, okay, all that's happened here is a terrain shift. You still love each other, you're still compatible. Let's just get to the bottom of what this is, understand where the other person's at now and how to talk to them and how to support them in their journey. You can support her in her journey, you can support him in his journey, and there starts to have so much more compassion. There's other cases where the two people are incredibly personality compatible when they meet, but their terrains were different from the start. Someone at diamonds married someone at square because they got sexual chemistry. Their compatibility in the personality stuff is really great. They don't know that there are different terrains, but they just know that on fundamental stuff, they're clashing. or when something big comes up that has a lot of charge, like an illness or a collapse of a business or a family member passing. In those really tough times is often when the terrain differences come out. Like when we're all put into lockdown, trapped in a house together for 10 months, like has happened over the past year in different countries, that's when these things show themselves. So the personality compatibilities are still there, but there's bigger stuff playing out that's causing clash. So the more someone can understand this, get their partner to do the quiz, or go and see someone who's trained in the 10 terrains, which, as I said, will be next year, will exist, then they can get along better and understand that. And depending on which terrain the people are at, that will play out very differently.
I think the triggering point is the terrains really show themselves in moments of stress and crisis. You know, people can say, oh, I'm very enlightened and I'm, you know, very on my game. And then when something happens, they revert to form, as I say. They, you know, they get very, they change. They don't, the mask falls away and they completely are a different person, but they're really the person underneath that was always there. They're just reflecting the terrain and their need for safety. And so as someone is in a very victim relationship to consciousness, they're going to just start grabbing everything and it's just like a drowning person. They're just going to pull everything and everyone down with them. And it's just an automatic response of, it's almost a knee-jerk reaction. So you can start to see this with people as they get triggered and as conflicts and crises happen. Knowing the terrains are going to really help you get, okay, oh, I see what is happening with this person. They're just grabbing now because they're drowning. And rather than try and go to war with them and drown with them, you can actually start to have compassion and throw them a lifeline, because you can start to get them, you know, help them get a hold of things, because you're in a place that's more grounded in the moment.
We've had a lot of people write to us, especially in the last year or so with all the crises happening in the world, saying, you know, like that we did a series of videos when the coronavirus was really big, explaining how each terrain was responding differently to the lockdown. And we had people write to us saying, oh my God, I'm feeling so much more relaxed now, because I was getting so angry with the people I'm living with because they were not wanting to wear a mask, or they wanted to wear a mask and I don't believe in masks, or whatever it was. Yeah. And suddenly I get why they have that opinion now. I understand it now. I'm so much less angry at them. I can allow them to have that difference now, because I get why. Like for some people, just understanding why someone's doing something allows so much of the anger to drop away, and then you can support that person in their point of view. You can have compassion for them, and sometimes just the understanding is enough. You don't even need a mediator. Sometimes you will need a mediator, but for some people, just to understand, oh my God, my father's at square now, I understand why he needs to do the lockdown and the mask and everything, because it's his sense of contributing to the functioning of society. You know, like I can understand that. Okay, I don't agree with that because I'm at Diamond and I've done all this research on myself that shows me this and this and this, but it just diffuses the situation. And we've had a lot of people write to us over that period of time saying, oh my God, I'm so glad I watched that video.
Well, I want to say I'm grateful you guys have created this. It's a gift to the collective. It's very helpful. I recommend everyone go take the test. I have to say, when I took the test, which, like you say, was just $5, I learned a lot actually just taking the test, because the questions that were asked made me think in ways I'm not used to thinking about myself, about how I feel about certain things. So for that alone, it was very, very helpful. And then I got the email and followed the directions to get more information, and I intend to follow through even more. So thank you for creating this. And I'm glad you guys did follow through. I'm glad the disillusion of your romantic relationship didn't stop your professional relationship, so that you continue working together, which I think is a testament to you and your work. Thank you for that. What would you like to say in closing to everyone about who should seek you out, who should go to your website? And what is your website again?
Well, the website, 10terrains.com, and I'll spell that TENTERRAINS.com. You can go to the homepage. We've got links there to take the quiz, links to the book. The book's available at all booksellers, online booksellers. The YouTube videos, our social media channels give a lot of information. We're building more videos all the time. We really highly encourage everyone to do the self-analysis quiz, because that will help you really get a sense of, you know, the idea of knowing who you are is knowing where you are. So this is a way to back into who am I by knowing where am I, and by knowing where am I, you're able to start to really get to know yourself, because you're where you're at for a reason. And then that will start to open your journey. Reading the book will start to give you a better sense of the model. Watching and staying up with our YouTube videos will start to just build it, and you'll just start to see this as you start to move into this understanding. You'll see it around you. It'll just become something that'll be like seeing gravity for the first time, and you just look around and just see, you know, everything falling from trees, and just like, oh wow, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there. It's quite fun.
And I would say that in answer to your question of who should do this, the kinds of people that this will really help, obviously anyone who's in any kind of conflict with a family member or a life partner or a colleague, this is going to help you get along with them better to figure out their terrain and learn your terrain. But also if you're at any kind of crossroads in your life, like you feel like you're changing, you don't really know what career to do anymore, or you don't resonate with where you're living, or something's shifting within you and you can't figure out what's happening, you're feeling a bit lost, this is a fantastic point to do this quiz, because you may be actually in the process of shifting from one terrain to the next, and this can be a crucial piece of information for you to know right now, that to help you ground where you're at and go, okay, this is normal, and here's some things that can help me make my decision. And also, I would say if you're someone who feels misunderstood, or like you don't have people in your life who really get you, you could just be at a different terrain from the people around you, at a different terrain from your culture. And sometimes doing this can just give you a massive sense of peace, and then you can connect with other people at your terrain. And also if you're going through something really big like an illness, there's different kinds of approaches that work better at each terrain. So it's a crucial thing to know about yourself. Like if you're at square, you're going to take a very different approach to your health to someone at spiral or diamond or something. So these are times in your life where, you know, where this information is really, really helpful. And just if you are a spiritual seeker and you're someone who just wants to know yourself deeply, more than just at an ego personality level, you want to understand your own spiritual journey, where you're at in your journey right now, this is just of so much value to you. Like for me personally, even just when I think of how much it's helped me get along better with my family members, but also just to understand myself, where I'm at right now in my path, and that it's okay to be there. There's no need to be anywhere else. And I can look back on my life and see the terrains I was at previously and why things played out so differently. It's just been such important knowledge for me personally. That's all I can talk about. But
yeah, there's really
found
not any, and I've looked at everything on this planet. There's no maps out there of our spiritual evolution and our spiritual journey that really lay it out as just a very simple, you know, these are the steps you go through, and literally we go through these, you know, you may have a group of people at the same terrain, they all appear completely different, but underneath it all, they've got similarities that are why they're there, and it shows up very empirically. It's like this journey, we literally can map precisely where someone is at in each point in these terrains. You're at either the valley or you're at some point up over this mountain to the next valley, and there's points along the way. We literally can see each of these, and everybody's going through them, and it's a universal that we're all living. And so by knowing this, you really get in harmony with the universal that we're all living inside of.
I'm going to be the first to say, I think you've hit on something. I love it. And you know what? It feels fun too. And that's one of the best parts about it.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I'm all about fun, so I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you, Tahnee Woolf and Alan David Reed. Thank you so much. Your book is called The 10 Terrains of Consciousness. People can order it at 10terrains.com, spelling it TENTERRAINS.com. Anywhere else they can order that?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon or any bookseller.
Yeah, anywhere. It's available everywhere.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been a delight.
Thank you, Scott. We really enjoyed the conversation.
You've asked amazing questions.
Oh, great. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.